All right, let's jump right into our deep dive today. It's Acts chapter 21.
Ooh, yeah, Acts 21.
Buckle up. We're going to Jerusalem with Paul. It's going to be a wild ride.
And it really is. It's a chapter full of travel and prophecy and intense encounters.
Yeah, so much going on. It's like a personal tutor for the Bible right here.
Exactly. We're breaking it down step by step. All the key events, the characters, the controversies.
Okay, so picture this. Paul and his crew, they're wrapping up this missionary journey. They're determined to reach Jerusalem.
Right, full steam ahead.
But it's not exactly smooth sailing, is it?
Not quite. Their journey starts off innocently enough. They sail from Kuz to Patara. They find another ship heading to Tyre.
Okay, Tyre.
Yeah.
I remember that from Sunday school.
And they spend a week there with the disciples.
Oh, so they got to hang out with some fellow believers.
They did, but it wasn't just a casual visit. This is where we get our first hint of the trouble brewing.
Oh, here we go.
The disciples in Tyre, they give Paul a warning.
A warning, like, don't drink the water.
More serious than that. They tell him, don't go up to Jerusalem.
Whoa, hold up. What? Why?
And here's the kicker. The text says they were moved by the Spirit to say this.
Okay, so this wasn't just a gut feeling. It was a divine message.
Exactly, a prophecy.
Man, that would be intense to get a prophecy
Wow.
like that. So what did Paul do? Did he just ignore it?
You know, it's interesting. The text doesn't say they ignored it. They actually received it with a lot of gravity.
So they took it seriously.
They did. They all knelt down on the shore. The disciples, Paul, his companions, they prayed together.
Wow, with wives and children too.
Right there on the beach before they set sail again.
Oh, I can just imagine that scene. So powerful.
It's a real mixture of foreboding,
Yeah.
Knowing there's trouble ahead, but also this deep trust in God's plan.
Like they knew it wouldn't be easy, but they had to go anyway.
Exactly. They were committed to following God's leading no matter what.
Talk about faith. Okay, so they leave Tyre and Weil. Where do they go next?
Well, they sail to Ptolemais. They make a quick stop. Then they head on down to Caesarea.
Caesarea.
Yeah.
That's where,
That's where Philip the Evangelist lived.
Oh, right. The one who preached to the Ethiopian eunuch.
That's the one. And you know what's cool?
What's cool?
He had 4 daughters who prophesied.
Wait, prophesying daughters. That's amazing. We need to hear more about them sometime.
Absolutely. It shows us that God worked through women just as much as men in the early church.
I love that. So they're staying with Philip and his family. Sounds like a pretty good time.
It was. But then things take another dramatic turn.
Uh-oh. I have a feeling I know what's coming.
A prophet named Agabus arrives from Judea.
This is where it gets really interesting. Tell us about Agabus.
Okay, so Agabus shows up, and he takes Paul's belt.
Paul's belt. Like his actual belt.
Yes, he takes Paul's belt, and he binds his own hands and feet with it.
Whoa. Okay, that's pretty visual.
It was a symbolic act.
A prophecy in action.
Exactly. And he says to Paul, this is what the Jews in Jerusalem will do to you. They will bind you like this and hand you over to the Gentiles.
Chills. Seriously, chills.
Can you imagine witnessing that?
It would be terrifying.
I can't even imagine how Paul must have felt.
I bet everyone was freaking out, begging him to turn back.
They were. The text says everyone, including Paul's traveling companions, they pleaded with him not to go to Jerusalem.
They must have been heartbroken.
Weeping, even. They were so worried about what might happen to him.
But Paul, being Paul, he doesn't back down.
Nope. He says he's ready not only to be bound, but even to die in Jerusalem for the name of Jesus.
Wow, talk about commitment. He knew the risks.
He did.
And he was willing to face them head on.
His response really shows us his character, that deep conviction, the willingness to suffer for the gospel.
He truly believed that following Jesus was worth any cost.
Absolutely.
So they press on towards Jerusalem.
Despite the warnings, despite the tears.
It's like they're walking straight into a storm.
Knowing full well the danger that awaits.
And then they arrive in Jerusalem. What happens next?
Well, at first there's a lot of joy. The brothers and sisters there, they welcome them warmly.
That must have been a nice moment.
It was. A brief respite before the tension unfolds.
The calm before the storm, as they say.
Exactly.
Okay, so what happens next?
Well, the very next day, Paul goes with some of his companions to meet with James, the brother of Jesus,
Oh, wow.
and the elders of the Jerusalem church.
This is a big meeting.
It is.
What's the purpose of this meeting?
This is where we get to the heart of the controversy surrounding Paul and his ministry.
Okay, lay it on me.
So you've got Jewish believers who are very zealous for the law. They strictly adhere to Mosaic law.
Right, the OG rule followers.
And then you have Paul who's been preaching that salvation comes through faith in Jesus Christ, regardless of whether you follow all the Jewish customs.
Okay, so two different perspectives.
And that's where the clash happens.
Because these Jewish believers,
Yeah.
they're hearing reports that Paul's teaching Jews to abandon these traditions.
Right, and they're worried. They're afraid this will create division
Yeah.
and undermine the unity of the church.
It's a huge cultural shift. The early church is trying to figure out how to include Gentile believers without abandoning its Jewish roots.
Exactly. It's a question of identity and tradition.
It's a dilemma that still resonates today, you know. How do different groups reconcile their beliefs with changing times and diverse perspectives?
That's the question.
So, back in Jerusalem, how do they try to address this dilemma with Paul?
Well, James and the elders, they come up with a compromise.
The conference.
They suggest that Paul participate in a purification ritual at the temple
Okay, a purification ritual.
to show his respect for the law and to kind of quiet down the rumors about his teachings.
So it's a public display of respect for Jewish customs.
Right. A strategic move to appease the Jewish believers and maintain some semblance of unity.
But does Paul agree to this? I mean, wouldn't that contradict his message of freedom from the law?
It's a good question. He does agree, hoping to show sensitivity to Jewish concerns while still staying true to his convictions.
It's a tough balancing act. He's trying to bridge the divide. But as we'll see, this decision has some unintended consequences.
Oh, yeah.
It's a reminder that even the best intentions can backfire sometimes. So what happens when Paul goes to the temple?
Well, as he's participating in the ritual, he's spotted by some Jews from Asia who had opposed him before.
Uh-oh.
And they immediately start causing trouble.
What do?
They accuse Paul of bringing Gentiles into the temple, which was a serious offense in their eyes.
I can already see this escalating quickly.
They claim to have seen him with Trophimus, an Ephesian Gentile.
Oh, no.
And this just fuels their outrage.
Classic mob mentality. Rumors and accusations spreading like wildfire.
It's total chaos. The city's in an uproar. A mob forms, and they drag Paul out of the temple to prevent what they see as further defilement.
Poor Paul.
They shut the temple doors, cutting off any chance of escape.
It's getting scary now.
And the mob.
Yeah.
They're intent on killing Paul.
It's terrifying to see how quickly religious zeal can turn into violence.
It really is.
So what happens to Paul? Is this the end?
It looks pretty bleak, right?
Yeah.
But thankfully, the Roman authorities arrive just in time.
Phew. Talk about a close call.
They heard about the riot. The Roman chief captain rushes to the scene with soldiers. They manage to halt the violence before it gets even worse.
Thank goodness for the Romans. But things are still pretty chaotic, right?
Oh yeah, super chaotic.
What does the chief captain do?
Amidst all the confusion, he arrests Paul. He figures Paul's the cause of the disturbance.
Oh, the irony. He's trying to keep the peace,
Right.
and he gets arrested for it.
They bind him with chains. They start taking him to the Roman fortress for safety.
Hopefully things will calm down there.
But they're surrounded by this angry mob. People are yelling, "Away with him!"
They just want him gone.
It's a stark reminder of the hatred and animosity directed at Paul.
And the real danger he's facing.
But even in this moment of chaos, Paul doesn't give up.
What does he do?
Just as they're about to lead him into the fortress, Paul speaks up. He asks the chief captain, "May I speak to you?"
Bold move, considering the circumstances.
It is.
What happens next?
And this is where things get a little bit funny amidst all the drama.
Okay, I could use a laugh right now.
The chief captain is surprised to hear Paul speak Greek.
He didn't expect that.
He asks Paul, "Can you speak Greek?"
Wait, what? Why is he so surprised?
He had actually mistaken Paul for someone else entirely.
Right.
He thought Paul was an Egyptian rebel leader who had caused trouble earlier.
What? A case of mistaken identity.
It's almost comical, except it could have had life or death consequences.
So what does Paul do?
He quickly sets the record straight. He tells the chief captain, "I am a Jew from Tarsus, a citizen of no mean city in Cilicia. I beg you, permit me to speak to the people."
He's asserting his rights
He is.
and his identity. What does the chief captain say?
Surprisingly, he grants Paul's request.
Really?
And that sets the stage for a dramatic confrontation.
Okay, here we go again.
Paul, standing on the stairs of the fortress, about to address the very mob that moments ago was trying to kill him.
This is going to be good. Or maybe really bad. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Okay, so last time we left Paul, he was about to address that angry mob in Jerusalem. Talk about a tough crowd.
It's a pivotal moment, not just for Paul, but for the whole future of Christianity.
Yeah, the stakes are high. So what does he do? Does he try to reason with them? Appeal to their sense of justice?
He does something really clever. He starts speaking to them in Hebrew.
Their own language.
Exactly.
That's
It
what
gets their attention right away. And it shows respect for their culture.
It's like he's disarming them before he even starts talking.
Exactly.
So what does he actually say?
He tells his story.
His story?
Yeah. He starts by talking about his Jewish upbringing in Tarsus.
Okay, so he's establishing his credibility.
Right. He talks about his education under Gamaliel, famous rabbi.
I've heard of him.
And then he even talks about his time persecuting Christians.
Wait, what? He admits to that.
He does.
Why would he do that?
It's brilliant, really. By emphasizing his shared heritage and his dramatic conversion, he's creating common ground with the crowd.
He's saying, look, I was once like you.
Exactly.
It's a way of humanizing himself.
To people who want to see him dead.
That's incredible.
It takes a lot of courage.
And I bet it was effective.
It was. He goes on to describe his encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus.
The blinding light. The voice from heaven.
The whole shebang.
That must have resonated with a crowd who believed in miracles.
Right.
So he's telling his personal story. What else?
Yep. Well, he talks about his mission to the Gentiles.
Ah, here we go.
But he frames it in a way that's really important. He's not saying, forget the law.
He's not rejecting Judaism.
Not at all. He's saying that this mission to the Gentiles, it's part of God's bigger plan to offer salvation to all nations.
Okay, so he's trying to broaden their perspective.
Exactly.
So how does the crowd react to all this?
At first, they're quiet. They seem to be listening.
Maybe they're starting to understand?
Maybe. But then, as soon as Paul mentions the Gentiles,
Whoa.
the peace is shattered. The crowd erupts in fury.
What do they say?
They shout, "Away with such a fellow from the earth. He is not fit to live."
Man, that's heartbreaking.
It is.
After all that effort, all that heartfelt storytelling,
They still reject him,
it shows how deep-seated prejudice can be.
even in the face of reason and personal testimony.
So what happens next? Does the mob attack again?
The Roman chief captain, he's worried. He doesn't want another riot.
I can't blame him.
So he orders Paul to be taken inside the fortress and flogged.
Flogged. That's brutal.
Roman law was harsh.
It seems so unfair. Paul just poured his heart out, and now he's going to be punished for it.
It does seem that way. But then, just as they're about to flog him, Paul speaks up.
What does he say?
He says, "Is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman and uncondemned?"
Hold on. Paul's a Roman citizen,
He is.
and that's a big deal, right?
Huge deal. Roman citizenship came with legal protections. It was illegal to flog a Roman citizen without a trial.
So Paul just changed the game.
He did.
This little detail.
His Roman citizenship.
It becomes a major turning point. What's the chief captain's reaction?
He's stunned.
At that,
He immediately stops the flogging and starts questioning Paul.
he's probably freaking out a little bit.
I'm sure he was. He realizes he's made a big mistake.
A very big mistake.
So what does he do?
I'm on the edge of my seat.
He decides to play it safe. He calls together the Jewish council, the Sanhedrin.
Okay, so now Paul's going to face the Jewish authorities.
It's a whole new level of complexity.
We have to wait for part 3 to see how that unfolds. Okay, so here we are, the final chapter of our Acts 21 deep dive. Paul's about to stand trial before the Sanhedrin.
The highest Jewish council.
Right, they're responsible for interpreting and enforcing Jewish law.
Exactly.
But remember, they were still under Roman authority, so their power was limited.
It's a delicate balance.
And to make things even more complicated, the Sanhedrin was deeply divided.
Oh, yeah. Pharisees, Sadducees, other factions.
Not exactly a recipe for a smooth trial.
Not at all.
So what happens when Paul appears before them?
Well, as you can imagine, things get pretty heated. Paul starts by saying that he's lived with a clear conscience before God.
Seems like a reasonable statement.
You'd think so. But the high priest, Ananias, he doesn't take it well.
What does he do?
He orders the people standing near Paul to strike him on the mouth.
What?
Seriously. It's a shocking display of violence. It really is. How could a religious leader condone such a thing?
It shows how personal and volatile the situation had become.
Yeah, things are definitely out of control.
And Paul, understandably, he is outraged.
I would be too.
He calls Ananias a whitewashed wall, accusing him of violating the very law he's supposed to uphold.
Paul's not holding back.
He's not.
But it's interesting, Even in this moment of anger, Paul still shows respect for the office of the high priest.
Oh, so.
Well, he apologizes when he's told who an Ananias is.
Oh, right. He didn't realize he was talking to the high priest.
It shows that he respected the position.
Even if he disagreed with the individual.
Makes sense. So what happens next? Does the trial continue? The whole thing just erupts into chaos. The Pharisees and Sadducees start arguing. They were already at odds with each other.
Can you remind us who the Pharisees and Sadducees were?
Of course. Think of them as two different schools of thought within Judaism.
Okay.
The Pharisees, they believed in the resurrection, the authority of oral tradition. The Sadducees, they rejected those beliefs.
Got it. So they had very different interpretations of the law.
Exactly.
And they were often fighting for influence.
And Paul's trial becomes a proxy battle for their power struggles.
That's fascinating.
It really is. Paul's presence just exacerbates these existing tensions.
So what does Paul do?
He sees an opportunity.
Of course he does.
He's a smart guy,
He declares himself a Pharisee,
emphasizing his belief in the resurrection.
which was a key point of contention between the two groups.
Exactly.
Clever move.
It throws the council into even more disarray. Everyone's shouting, arguing. The chief captain has to intervene. He removes Paul from the chamber for his own safety.
So Paul's quick thinking buys him some time.
It does.
But he's still in danger.
Oh, yeah. The threats against him are still very real. That night, Paul has a vision.
A vision.
From the Lord, he's told, "Take courage, for as you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must bear witness also in Rome."
Wow, that's powerful.
It's a reassurance from God that Paul's mission isn't over.
Despite all the opposition,
And it foreshadows his eventual journey to Rome.
to the heart of the Roman Empire.
It's like the forces opposing Paul. They're inadvertently pushing him towards a wider audience.
God works in mysterious ways.
He does.
So what happens next?
Well, the threats escalate. A group of over 40 Jewish men, they make a vow to kill Paul.
Wow, they're serious about silencing him.
They even try to involve the Jewish leaders in their scheme.
It's scary how far people will go to protect their power.
It is.
But their plan backfires.
It does. Paul's nephew finds out about the plot. He warns his uncle.
Good for him. He risked his own safety to save Paul.
He did.
Yeah.
And the chief captain, he realizes how serious this is. He decides to transfer Paul secretly to Caesarea.
To get him away from the danger.
Exactly.
Caesarea was the Roman administrative capital of Judea.
But safer for Paul.
So they sneak him out of Jerusalem under cover of night.
With a heavy military escort.
Sounds like a scene from an action movie.
It does.
And that's the end of our deep dive into Acts 21.
A chapter full of dramatic twists and turns.
We saw Paul's boldness, his strategic thinking, his unwavering faith.
Even in the face of intense opposition.
He never lost sight of his mission.
A powerful reminder for us all.
That even when we face adversity, God can use those experiences to shape us and to advance his purposes in ways we can't imagine.
It's been a fascinating journey.
Thanks for joining us.